So it doesn't make a lot of sense to have our data in memory. Let's switch this up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a method, and I'm going to call this read JSON. We did this in another lesson before. And what this is going to do is this is going to wrap around my read file. And when I go to read JSON, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a new promise. Because I don't want to do this with callbacks. This is going to give me a resolve and a reject. And what I'm going to end up doing here is that I'm going to go over here and my file name, let's just put it here. We'll say that our file name is ./users.json, doesn't exist. We'll create it in a minute here. What we're going to do here is we're going to say fs read file, and it's going to end up reading the file. This is going to end up getting callback, which is either going to be an error or some data. Again, it doesn't know the format, but if we do toString, it'll end up putting it in UTF-8. And what we're going to end up doing here is we'll go over here and we will parse it. So we will put a try here and a catch. And this is going to be a promise, so we'll go over here and we'll return, and this is going to be our data, and we'll say JSON, we want to parse you. Here's the data that we're going to parse you with, data to string. And if there's an error, and return is actually not correct, what I want to do here is I want to resolve this. Eventually we'll be using a database, but this will end up working for now. And if I run into an error here, let's actually be a little more clear here. We'll go over here and say, if in fact you're successful, we're going to try this, because even if we're successful, what if our file's not in the right format? And if we're not successful, we're going to reject with whatever the error is. And if we have an error down here, we're also going to reject with the error as well. So now I've got the ability to read this JSON file. Let's just set up this JSON file. This is going to be users.json. And within this file, we're just going to put in, let's just start out with one user. We'll say ID is 1, name is going to be Mo. And that's valid JSON, and we'll go back over here to our DB. And what we'll do here is then when we go to get the users, what we'll end up doing is we could go over here and we could end up returning, and we'll say we want you to read the JSON data. This is what's going to tell us where our users are. Again, we're using a promise here. And what this would give us the ability to do is that this is either going to be successful or it's going to end up being a failure here. And now when we go over to our server, if we just went to run this now, it's kind of interesting here. If we went over here, we wouldn't end up getting really anything back here because this is really not our data. We really need to await to get our data. So what we'd end up doing here is we could go over here and we could say, wait, this is going to be a promise. We want to wait for it. That's going to be our data. And we'll go over here, and since we want to use await, this is a function, and we end up putting async in front of it. And let's take a look and see if we end up getting our data back here. So one thing that we're seeing here, and this actually is kind of interesting. So there's an error that's happening, and we're spinning around here. So we'll talk about how we end up handling our errors, but we're not successful. Our await didn't end up working here. So this is actually where, if you're going to use await here, you also want to put this in a try and a catch. You'll get an exception, and this is really what that next is for. So next says, hey, look, did you have an error? I'll treat it automatically as an error. Just send me the exception that you end up having. So here, we always want the user to see something, and here we'll actually see the error, right? FS is not defined. And now if we go back here to our DB, which is just really a couple of lines of code here, what I had forgotten to do was to bring in FS and this is from the FS module. So now we have a little bit more of a data layer. We've got the ability to get our data, and for the first time, we're also looking at when things could end up going wrong. If there was a problem getting our users, we're going to want to let the user know that there was an exception. And now if we end up running this, we should see our one user. And if we go back to our home page, we should still be able to see that one user.